Hello, you perplexed plaid pajamas. This is the Roguerifler, and this is the release video for the buffed melee mod. So, melee's kind of weak when it gets to mid-late game, especially when you're, talking about unupgraded melee. And that's because melee is very dependent upon being able to stagger the unit that they're attacking, uh, and they're very dependent upon not being staggered to get their melee overwatch off, right? Uh, if if they get staggered, they lose their melee overwatch. If they can't stagger the unit they're attacking, they have no defensive measures, right? Like if a melee unit runs in, um, it doesn't get cover bonuses. It doesn't, it has really no survival benefits, right? Its survival comes from staggering the units attacking, potentially staggering it again with its melee overwatch, right? And if it can't do that, it's pretty much worthless, right? Because if you look at the stat line, let's say, do I have a good example here? Yeah, let's look at our sniper guy. 45 HP, 1 armor. Let's look at our melee guy. 45 HP. This one's actually, he's got extra shields because he's next to that dude. But their base stats are actually quite similar, right? Your squishy backline sniper has the same stats as your melee unit. And your squishy backline sniper can, stay out of range, hide behind light cover, whereas your melee unit pretty much has to do some, face time with the enemy army, and it's doesn't really work out that well. So, especially when they can't stagger other units. So I made a small number of changes to help this out and make it so melee is useful, even unmod it in the mid to late game. So let's demo it a bit. So a lot happened there, and it doesn't help that the camera decides to jerk around wildly. I don't know why it does that. But let's go back here. So we attack someone in melee, so we get the engaged in melee trait. This makes our unit 40% hard to hit with ranged weapons. That sounds like a big buff, but it's kind of like being able to take cover with melee units, right? It's similar to the cover bonus. It's not the exact same. If I could implement the exact same bonus, I would, but I can't. So get 40%. You're 40% hard to hit. The other thing is when you hit a unit in melee, it gets the hindered trait, right? That unit suffers a 30% accuracy penalty on all ranged attacks. So that helps it where, like, if the melee unit cannot stagger the unit it's attacking, it can still mess it up. Now, this demonstration's a little flawed. I can't demonstrate. There's no large units here, but units that are small and normal size can only hinder units that are small and normal size. Large units and huge units can hinder everything, right, with their melee attacks. So size does matter a little bit there. Like a little pustule unit isn't going to run over and hinder your tank, right? It kind of makes the bigger melee units feel, important. But going back to things, right? You have a engage in melee trait to make them more survivable, and a hinder trait that they can apply to enemies. So that way, staggering them isn't as important. And further, you've probably noticed that this scavenger doesn't have stagger resistance, and yet he got his counterattack off, right? So the final major change to melee units is that staggering no longer cancels melee overwatch. Again, this is just to make them less dependent on being stagger resistant, right? Being stagger resistant is still important, right? Most melee units have repeating attacks. Having stagger resistance means you get to do more damage, but it kind of was double dipping with melee overwatch, because if you staggered a melee unit, it lost half of its potential damage output. Which made it so important for melee units to have high stagger resistance and be able to stagger units. So those are the three major changes. Now you might be saying, "Wow, that sounds really overpowered, right? How would I ever deal with melee units that can run in and suddenly become unhittable by ranged weapons? You monster, you're destroying the game." Well, so first thing to note is that all these buffs only last, and these debuffs only last for a turn, meaning they fall off at the start of your next turn, right? So if a melee unit comes in and attacks you, gets all these buffs, at the start of its next turn, it no longer has those buffs, meaning Overwatch counters these buffs, like they bypass them, right? I think I even set up so it like mechanically is enforced because there's some weird edge cases where that's not true. But essentially, Overwatch bypasses these hindered and engaged, the hindered trait and the engaged and melee trait, right? Or debuff, I should say. So, if you do get a bunch of melee units running at you, you can set up an Overwatch arc, right? They have to run into them. Overwatch is pretty much the hard counter to melee in this game, and every faction has access to it. On top of that, CC works wonders too, right? Like, what's a good example? None of these guys are good examples, but most factions have great ways to CC their enemies, right? Like, the Amazons have that like stagger blind arrow. Again, blind also stops melee Overwatch. The Vanguards have, all those grenades, the Devar. All their units have melee attacks that can displace units, right? There's a lot of ways to deal with melee, but, just attacking them directly after you've been attacked is not really an option anymore. So you gotta slow them down, you gotta stagger them, you gotta retreat your units, set up Overwatch arcs. You've got to, use other status effects you have. If they're immune to stagger, they're probably not immune to being slowed or blinded or entangled, you name it. Like, there's a lot of ways to slow down these units, and also, get the punish on them when they engage. I played 2 full playthroughs with this mod, and I haven't had any issues. Melee hasn't even felt, powerful. It's felt normal, which makes me think these changes are ready to be released. So I think that's it. Oh, there's the heroes also have, there's a trait called counterattack, which at this point, since all melee units aren't, they retain their melee Overwatch when staggered, I had to rework it. So now it makes your melee counterattack do, I think, 50% more damage, and it can't miss, which is great for if you want to make your hero, like your melee hero, go up against big, large targets. If they're going up on smaller targets, it's kind of overkill. But against bigger targets, your like melee unit with a side blade can just run up to a tank and threaten to kill it, which is pretty cool. So that's the melee buffed mod, or the buffed melee mod, I should say. Hope you enjoy it.